Hey folks, Tim Murray, Michael Jenkins. You know us as The Daily Line on NBC Sports Radio every weekday from 3 to 7 in the East. And since it's the All-Star break and there's been so many incredible performances by names that maybe aren't household names. And by I mean by no LeBron, no Steph Curry. Steph Curry's having a great year.
Right.
But it's not what James Harden has done, who is the reigning MVP. So, yeah, I guess the beard is certainly a household name. But then you've got Giannis. And when you look at the odds-on favorites to win the MVP, you've got James Harden as the overwhelming favorite. He's minus 250, according to the folks at the Westgate Superbook. Then you've got Giannis at plus 250. And a name that's starting to really gain some steam is Paul George at plus 750. Jenks, is there value to be had in the NBA MVP world, or is it just, don't overthink this? James Harden is dropping points at a historic rate. His team is winning. They're 21-10 in this 31-game streak in which he has eclipsed 30 or more points, tied for the second longest in the history of the NBA. Is it just, don't overthink it, it's going to be James Harden?
I don't know if it's that simple. I think Harden is the guy. The numbers certainly bear that out. But Giannis is one of those players that right now what he's doing is he is forcing people to look at what he's doing because he has a more well-rounded game. You know, I complained the other night that James Harden got in a game late and he had to get his 30, and once he did, he left. I wasn't impressed by that. Didn't really knock him down a peg. But what Giannis is doing, and against the Pacers is a perfect example. I mentioned that because I had the Pacers in that game plus 4.5. Pacers were up by 9 in the fourth. Then Giannis decides it's time for me to take over, and they win by 9. An 18-point swing, and it was on Giannis alone. And when you drop a triple-double with 19 boards, it's the same thing with Russell Westbrook, right? He had this incredible string of triple-doubles, and people took note and said, whoa, that's impressive. But Giannis is doing the same thing for a team that has the best record in the NBA. I think in the second half of the season, if that continues, the gap between Harden and Giannis could start to close, and you could get some value with plus money on Giannis.
You know, I don't think Paul George will win it. He'll certainly been on a lot of ballots, not first, but he's a guy that I do think is going a little bit under the radar, and Vegas is starting to recognize that. He's third right now in the odds at plus 750, which is pretty decent for Paul George, because when people think Oklahoma City, and you even mentioned it, Russell Westbrook and his triple-double streak, but their best player is Paul George.
Yeah.
Paul George is playing remarkable basketball right now. I wouldn't put any money on him, but it's just one of those cases to really keep an eye on, because Oklahoma City right now is better in the standings than Houston is. So it's just something to keep an eye on. But I think something that will detract from voters picking him to be the MVP is the fact that Russell Westbrook is on his team. Not the reigning MVP, but a MVP, and he is a stat compiler. And he gets those triple-doubles, but you need to realize the advanced statistics really like Paul George. But I'm with you. I mean, Giannis is a guy that, for me, when it's all said and done, I believe that the Bucks will continue on this rate. They will be the best team in the NBA record-wise at the end of the year, and that has to count for something.
Absolutely.
And James Harden, when you look at what he's done, and I'm not trying to take anything away, because when Chris Paul went down, when Clint Capella went down, there he was to step up and have this ridiculous streak. He was really the only piece for them, and they have responded. As I mentioned, the record's 21-10 during this streak, so it's not like it's going a lot of points and they're not winning. Now, they did lose last night, but I think if you want to just base it on value, and that's what we do a lot. We think about value. There's not really much value to be had in James Harden at minus 250 right now. Plus 250 for Giannis, I just think the numbers he continues to put up, there's going to be a real discussion, because I think what he's doing is more sustainable. They bring in Nikola Mirotic as well from New Orleans, and he's just going to help Giannis. And think about the guys around Giannis. Now, in Houston, they've got Chris Paul, who's not himself. He's still dealing with injuries, but he's back. He's a big name. Chris Middleton is an all-star, but he's not a household name. This really is a Giannis-led team. Giannis is the only name that people really recognize. Malcolm Brogdon's been great, coming off the bench. Mirotic is going to be a huge asset for them. They're a great three-point shooting team. They're the best defensive team in the league, and a lot of that has to do with Giannis there too. So I just like plus 250 seems to be a good spot because they're going to be number one in the East, in my opinion, at the end of the year, and it's going to be mainly because of that guy.
Well, and if you're looking at perception, when you think of the Rockets, you think of Harden and Chris Paul. You think of the Thunder, you think of Paul George, and you think of Russ. You think of the Bucks, you think of Giannis. The reason for that is because he has carried the team. Now, Harden is still the overwhelming favorite, but you know what? A few weeks ago, he was more of a favorite. So those odds have gone down a little bit because Giannis is on his heels. At the end of the season, and the Rockets have been playing well, as you mentioned, at the end of the year, if these odds are close and the Bucks have the best record in the NBA, I think a lot of voters could say, potentially, you know what, I'm deferring to the team that had the best team during the regular season. That is the Milwaukee Bucks. I still think it's Harden's MVP to lose, but if it gets close, you might end up deferring to Giannis because he's been a monster in the first half of the season, and his numbers are only improving, whereas Harden is just scoring points.
And what's interesting, too, is for a while, Steph Curry was up there, but he's at plus 2,500.
Yeah, he's fallen off.
Out in Las Vegas. And you know, he has fallen victim to an extent of the players around him, like we've talked about. I mean, he's got a starting lineup that if DeMarcus Cousins is out there, get 5 Hall of Famers on the floor at the same time.
Right. It goes back to perception, right?
Yeah.
So even if Steph leaves, people say, well, the Warriors are still the Warriors. If Klay goes out, if Draymond goes out, if Boogie goes out, and that's another reason why I like the value on Giannis. He is the sole driver of that Milwaukee Bucks team.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it, and that's the thing, too. If you just look at the numbers, when Paul George is off the floor, there's a significant gap, believe it or not, but I don't think people are recognizing that unless you really dive into it. So in the end, you're going to have the number one team with Giannis. If James Harden ends up finishing at 36 points a game, which he's at right now, I think he's going to win the MVP. What I'm banking on and gambling on is the fact that it's going to drop off at some point. Maybe he finishes at 33, 34 points a game, which is still incredible. But remember, too, I just have this feeling that unless he continues at this extreme rate, he won it last year. I get this gut feeling that, you know, LeBron's a guy that you could have argued should have won more than 4 MVPs. And it felt like there was almost fatigue of LeBron always winning the MVP. And maybe now it's Giannis's time. It felt like last year, okay, it's James Harden's turn. You know, the year before that, it was Russell Westbrook's turn because he had the triple-doubles. It almost feels like now let's pass the torch to Giannis. He's on the best team in basketball record-wise, and he's putting up remarkable numbers. Let's just give it to Giannis.
Regardless of what happens, we get to watch some great basketball and some great basketball players. That's Tim Murray. I'm Michael Jenkins. This is The Daily Line.